Welcome back to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Rogers. I just want to remind you as we come into part 2 of the Meet the Transformers that all of our guests work in incredible places of ministry that are transforming their cities. You will want to check out our show notes because there you'll find links to all of these organizations. And let me just encourage you to head on down to a faith-based ministry like these in your city to see if there's something that you can do to help. And if nothing else, please pray as every day they engage in the work of God's kingdom. Now let's go to part 2 of our interview. Meet the Transformers. What have you learned about human suffering that church life didn't prepare you for? And I'm going to just put you on the spot, Doug, if you want to get this can of worms open, and then we'll start pulling them out.
Thank you for that. I think the one thing theologically is I don't think we understand the central Christian symbol of the cross very well. I think that in North America, we've sort of always heard of the redemptive lift, come to Jesus and everything is going to get better. But we haven't really understood that God chose to redeem the world not by getting rid of the problem, which is people, sinners, but by entering the world and entering the suffering. So that suffering is really where you find God most at work. And, our culture in the West here doesn't really understand any redemptive role for suffering. You'll find it in great pieces of art, in literature, and so on. But, in popular culture, there really is no sense of what suffering might be for. It's bad. And I mean, obviously, it's not good that people suffer. And we're all talking about, in one way or another, relieving suffering, right? But that's entering into their lives with them, isn't it? And so I learned that it might seem hard to say, but I think some people are called to live that life. It seems to be their calling, and no matter short of God's miraculous intervention, which I don't want to discount, but people suffer. And I mean, to every life to some extent. One of the things we would find with well-meaning church people would come, and we used to have the church teams that came to serve the food give a devotional. You probably did that back in your day. And the presupposition, if you listen, was always, well, you're here at a soup kitchen because you suffer, and you suffer because you don't know Jesus. So if you just knew Jesus, you wouldn't have to be at the soup kitchen anymore. And, there's some truth to some of that. That's not true. And what I was surprised to find when I got to the Ark is how many people did have a real Christian faith. Their lives didn't look like anything that you might think of with terms of redemptive lift, but there you are. And so I really had to start, and I mentioned to you years ago, Kevin, we really need to start thinking through a theology of suffering. And so where I've come to it is, the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz, his view on theodicy was, this is the best of all possible worlds. So I modified that a little bit to say, this is the best of all possible worlds with us in it, because God could have started over. He didn't need to keep us, but he chose to. And that means he entered into a broken world, and he came to bring redemption through it. So it's out of that suffering, out of that cross. And, C.S. Lewis said it, that God, whispers to us in our pleasures and shouts in our pains. It's often when, he gets our attention. And if we don't, let the suffering cause us to lose faith, then you actually grow in it. And I think we need to understand that the suffering is where God is at work. And that goes back, in my view, to that first question about who's the church. I think sometimes the church was afraid to enter into those kinds of social side ministries because they were afraid of losing the spiritual, the salvation, the evangelism piece. But I think, in fact, what the church has lost something in that, actually, right? And that is that understanding that God is at work in those hard places. And when the church removed themselves from that, they really lost something. So I'm a little bit like Sarah said, how you characterize the ark. It is an expression of the church, but I came to say, this is the church. I don't know what those things are, because this is where God is really, and of course God is working there too. But in more powerful ways, God is at work in those hard places. And I think that, to me too, is, in the world of postmodernism, when people are pretty much done with, the institutions, but they're responsive. I just read a thing today. I've been reading a book on secularism, and the author, who's a practicing Catholic, but he said that the church responds whenever they see or hear the real message of Christ. The world responds to that. And I'll give you a little example. When we were at the Ark, food was our thing, and we built partnerships by sharing. That's one way how you get out of your silo. Give what you have. And so one of the institutions we shared with was the women's agency down the street. Very secular, very reputation, anti-male. But we shared food, and the next thing you know, we got this lovely little plaque. I don't know if Sarah still has it, with little beads and stuff all plastered on it, thanking us. And then one day we got a call saying, they had more clothes than they could give out. And they knew we had clothing outlets, so could they bring us clothes? So the two ladies came down, never seen us before, walked in the door, headed straight to my assistant director and hugged him. Now you think about that dynamic. That's the love of Christ in the hard places. It breaks barriers. People are hungry for that. So I think we really do need to understand that go where the suffering people are, you'll find Jesus at work. It's not hard when he's there.
Yeah, there's a culture shock, isn't there, when we come from a comfortable life background, and out of compassion or calling, we enter into the suffering of others. What are some things that you've learned about suffering that you didn't know when you were back in youth group, when you were in a comfortable church that didn't have too much suffering in it that you could see? What have you since learned about suffering?
I can't talk about youth group. I grew up in Windsor, and we had such a small youth group, like it was me and my brother. But and so there was suffering. But I can tell you from my childhood, my grandfather was schizophrenic, bipolar, and he was a pastor who was removed from the pastorate because at that time mental illness was not looked highly upon. And he's the hero for my faith. So I learned from a young age that suffering was beautiful in people. So I'm super thankful for that, because I've always looked differently, I feel, because I painted, I was an artist in school, and we had to do a painting, and I did a massive homage to my grandfather, who was a weak, frail person, and I painted him in this very powerful way. So I don't know, I agree with Doug, like suffering is where God is at work. And to be honest, personally, I've had some suffering too, and I'm useless without it. Absolutely useless to anyone, including myself.
there are some people that might think that we're being too kind about suffering, that suffering's all from the devil, and that somebody following Jesus should have a victorious life over everything. And but again, I think that's an exaggerated perspective, because every one of us are going to hurt in some way. The Quakers had an expression called sanctified suffering. And what that meant was that God takes the really difficult, painful things that don't seem to come from him. They seem to come from somewhere darker. And God takes those situations and somehow transforms our nature, our character in the crucible of suffering. Because suffering will make you miserable and bitter, and it will make you die with a curse on your lips. But to understand that the suffering Savior, Jesus on the cross, I like what you said, Doug. We need to understand the cross better, because the things that we learn about humanity from a suffering Christ on the cross are world-shaking. I want to read a passage of scripture from Acts chapter 4, and this is a description of the early believers, the early disciples. Acts 4:32, all the believers were agreed in heart and mind. They didn't claim that anything they had was their own. Instead, they shared everything they owned. With great power, the apostles continued their teaching. They were telling people that the Lord Jesus had risen from the dead, and God's grace was working powerfully in all of them. So, I love this phrase, there were no needy persons among them. From time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them. They brought the money from the sales. They put it down at the apostles' feet, and it was then given out to anyone who needed it. This early church in Jerusalem seemed to eradicate poverty in their midst. One of their essential activities was the social work of caring for widows and orphans. And it came through everyone choosing to live generously and sacrificially to see that no one was without food, housing, no one was without belonging to a community of spiritual care and nurture. What do you think that churches, by and large, need to learn from the expressions of church that you're involved in with relief and development? Is, that same church in Jerusalem that was able to eradicate poverty, then the city went into a state of famine later on, and then everybody was struggling. Everybody was poor. And so even then, after caring for everybody else's need, they had to enter into their own state of suffering. And then God used the other parts of his kingdom, other churches and other places, to start to care for the church at Jerusalem. There's a lot going on there. So let's unpack this idea here of sharing what you have and eradicating poverty, but then also being able to be cared for when you can't care for yourself, when you're suffering. Somebody jump in there and yeah, go ahead, Roger.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, I've mentioned different times, and it's not always been popular, but I said it before and I'll say it again. In Canada, we have poverty because we accept it, right? And it's a different time Now, society lives by how much poverty can we tolerate, not how much we will eliminate. You know, we would never accept someone dying in a park from homelessness. We wouldn't accept a child walking down the street struggling from hunger. So we don't have that. But, you know, one out of 4 children in Windsor live in poverty. 1 out of 2, if you're in the West End, lives in poverty. We'll accept when my child goes to school and sits beside a child that's hungry. We can live with that. The people back in the old church had made a collective decision that they weren't going to accept that they were weakened by other people's struggling and suffering. You know, we don't have that consensus. And I've said many times, you know, there's going to be someone much smarter than me that ends poverty. So y'all just try to change my side of the street. But, you know, the reality is there has to be a groundswell, a shaking that makes people say, you know what? If a government comes up with an idea and say, you know what, we're going to end up homelessness, but we're going to end homelessness, but it's going to cost you $400 more a year on your property tax, people will burn their house down. Yeah, you know what I mean? But they'll go and give 500 to the mission, 500 to, you know, me, 500 to another, you know, shelter, you know, down the street, because they don't want to be told where their money goes. But because that funding is so fragmented, because you can't do anything with that, they give you 500 this time, but two young people overdose on the weekend, then it's going to go to recovery the next time. And then if, you know, something happens to a homeless person, then it's going to a homeless shelter. And you can't build any kind of substantial and sustainable change with that mentality. So, you know, the difference is in the old church, they had made collectively a commitment that as Christians, we're not going to, you know, even in the First Testament, it says if you see a man tethered to the yoke, you know, break the yoke. You just don't loosen the strap. You got to break the yoke. And we have systemic yokes that create poverty in this country. And we loosen the straps. We don't break the yokes. So,
yeah, what a thought that the reason we have poverty in Canada is because we allow it, because we're not fixing the problem. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, Kevin, I think as Sarah was talking a minute ago and Roger was just talking, I think back to what somebody said to me years ago, and that's that the church needs to get back in touch with Emmanuel, God with us. So Emmanuel, God with us implies in it that we are somewhere. And that is, it could be in our place of suffering. It could be in our place of hurting. It could be in our place of celebration and joy, but it's God with us. But there's a deeper part to that. And when we look at the fact that we are the hands and feet of Christ, we are his representation here on this world. So God with us is about us entering into those places of suffering with those who are hurting, those who are living in poverty. And I think if I had one message for the church today in reflecting on the first century church, it would be they got that. They understood that Emmanuel, God with us, meant that not only was he with us in our darkest of days, but that we are with others in their darkest of days. And I know, Kevin, you know, I've spoken on this topic when it comes to Christianity and social work. Most of the amazing social service programs we have around the world, including education and hospitals and everything, came out of the church. Friendly visitor program, and we forsook that. We forsook that calling, and it became God with them. Right? Or sorry, state with them, God with us, state with them, looking after the poor. And it's we are called to be Emmanuel, God with them.
Well said.
If I can say something, I think if you look at the early church, they spent the resources on one thing. They didn't have a big overhead. And most churches no matter what their mission statement says, spend most of the resources inside, looking after their own. And I'm not saying that that's altogether bad, but for the last few years, I've looked around and see churches, and I was involved with a building program in a church, so in Wingham. But now things are so expensive. I just don't think I'd want to be putting my name to those kinds of debts. I think it's going to be interesting now coming out of the pandemic. I think churches may very well be in a position to rethink what kind of resources do we need? Do we need to have we often, as evangelicals, we would criticize another tradition for their great monuments and cathedrals and stained glass windows. We haven't done much different, I think, in some respects. So again, it comes down to those, what's your mission? I think Royal City Mission is probably a good example there, where they have a resource. It's a lovely building, so nothing wrong with that, but it's used for that outreach, not just in reach. And we'll say that they're there for outreach, but we put them in suburbia. We have fled all the downtowns, and that's why the Arcade Mission has to be that expression down in the Old East Village, because nobody else is there. I shouldn't say nobody, but but even the churches that are there cater to the middle class. So I think coming out of this pandemic, maybe there'll be some rethinking of what exactly resources we need and how should we be spending what God gives us. I know that I've known over the years a couple of people whose goal was to give 50% of their income to missions. And they weren't, not because they were millionaires, some of them were former missionaries, right? So they lived a life of simplicity. And that's one of the problems that we think of suffering, is we think a good life is middle-class consumerism in this culture. That's how people can be happy. Sometimes it surprises you they don't have all that stuff. A life of simplicity and faith. And maybe that's what God is starting to call us back to through this time of suffering.
Well, if the economy tanks, we'll all be learning how to live with simplicity and faith. Yeah, Kevin, I saw your hand shoot up there.
I would agree with both these guys, and it's a really simple thing. If you read that passage, the believers knew people who were suffering.
Yeah,
that's part of the problem. They knew people who were in poverty. I don't think a lot of churches always know people who are suffering. They're disconnected from that. So for me, that we always talk about contact. Like, if you don't know someone, you probably aren't going to give something. Why would you?
Sometimes when you're suffering, the culture of church can antagonize that suffering that you're feeling, rather than bring comfort. So we also need to learn how to grieve with those who grieve, mourn with those who mourn, and enter into the suffering of others. And entering into suffering with somebody else isn't like, oh, you hurt so badly, you poor thing. That's not entering into suffering. That's sometimes just your presence and your warmth and your friendship and the fact that you don't understand how badly somebody hurts isn't always a prerequisite to alleviating suffering. Sometimes just recognizing that I know you're going through something that I can't comprehend, but I love you, and I'm gonna be with you. Is there any way I can help? Can I help carry the load with you, and not make your identity about my good works, not make your struggle my project, but no, I'm with you. And maybe that's something we're learning about God with us in our struggle and our suffering is that God doesn't just dish out ready-made answers all the time. Sometimes God just like with Paul, and his thorn in the flesh. He's got this horrible suffering going on. And God says, my grace is what you need. He wanted healing, but God said, I think you need grace. I think you need to know that I accept you and I love you. And even in this, you're not a lost cause. You're not hopeless. I'm with you. And Robert Lupton wrote a book entitled Toxic Charity, How Churches and Charities Hurt Those They Help. And I just want to read a quote from that book. Giving to those in need what they could be gaining from their own initiative may well be the kindest way to destroy people. We mean well, our motives are good, but we have neglected to conduct careful due diligence to determine emotional, economic, and cultural outcomes on the receiving end of our charity. Why do we miss this crucial aspect in evaluating our charitable work? Because as compassionate people, we have been evaluating our charity by the rewards we receive through service rather than the benefits received by the served. We have failed to adequately calculate the effects of our service on the lives of those reduced to objects of our pity and patronage. Thanks, Robert Lupton. What do you think? Talk to me about how you move from creating dependency on your services to supporting initiative in the people you're helping. And how do we promote the vision of the organization in ways that dignify the people that we are committed to serve?
It's so exciting to hear the stories of life and people having believers journey alongside them where there's life change. I think what Robert Lupton is sharing there in some ways is accurate. I think we can cultivate dependency by some of our actions, but the need is there. So it's kind of a almost like a chicken and egg, which you were talking earlier, Kevin, right? Is the dependency there because of the need? Is the dependency there because of our approach, because of our do-goodism? And I think that's the issue, is that even a lot of organizations who talk about empowerment, and we talk a lot about this and about our staff team, there's a false empowerment. There's a false empowerment that says, I want you to succeed, but really I'm helping you. I'm helping you do all of these things so that you can succeed. Whereas actual empowerment, again, it's that entering in, and it's that getting dirty and helping the individual discover what can they do and what can't they do? What is getting in the way? So we talk, people who come to Matthew House from all around the world, their literacy skills are all over the map. There are some who are thoroughly university educated in English and not only have very articulate English speaking skills, but written and comprehension. And then there are others who speak English very well, but can't even read it, let alone write it. And then there are others who have no English skills. So something as simple as that, we have people who will come to the office and say in very clear English, I need help completing this government form. And I've had staff say in this idea of empowerment, well, no, you can do that. And that's it. Or I've had staff just go, okay, let me help you with that. That's not empowerment. Either of those. Empowerment is saying, okay, what help do you need to do that? What is getting in your way of doing that? Let's see if we can help eliminate those things that are getting in your way of your success. And I think that's what Robert Lupton was talking about, is how we can, in our desire to help, step into the person's life and do for them what we think is best, as opposed to helping them discover what's getting in the way, and helping them deal with the barrier. And I think as Christians, again, it's that's where we need to enter in, and not do this surface flyover ministry where, oh yeah, we're going to do, this outreach project or this outreach project. That's not entering in. That's just giving stuff away, which is cheap.
How can we be involved in breaking generational poverty cycles that come through our doors? And I guess maybe a related question to that is that something that we want more than they want? We all want to see people thrive and do better. But this whole aspect of, are we doing it for them, or are we helping them to do it? And is that actually what they want? I'm sure that over time you get to know the grandparent, the parent, their kids, and then their grandkids, and you watch and you say, why are they still living in the chaos that started, maybe even before grandpa? When do we see real transformation, to the point where, our being the helper is not really needed, because they were able to, with our help themselves? How does transformation happen, that social lift? And can you tell necessarily who is going to rise above and who's going to stay stuck? Because I think Jesus said, you'll always have the poor with you. And, I think there is that reality that some people aren't going to be transformed, but we can love them. We can help them. We can, we can be their friend. We can be supportive in their lives and in the lives of successive generations. But you know what I'm talking about here, right? So let's dive in that pool now and talk about this whole idea of generational brokenness, generational dysfunction, and what's our role if we're granted permission.
Can I
go ahead, Mike, and then Sarah? Yeah.
I'm the youngest of 7 children who grew up with an abusive alcoholic father. Mm-hmm. And while he worked for Chrysler's, it was in the days before they make the big bucks. And my mom and dad split up, got back together, back together like every 6 months. I think I'm currently living in my 32nd home. And 26 of those were before I went to university. But what made the difference is not only Christ, of course, but it was men and women of faith who stepped into our lives. For me, it was my uncle's mother-in-law and father-in-law who became Grandma and Grandpa Green to me. It was their son, Bob Green, who one Sunday at church when I was 6 or 7 years of age, caught me as I was trying to sneak off to play downstairs with the pastor's son, and said, you know what, Mikey, you're better than this. In social work terms, and Sarah would know this, there are risk factors and there are protective factors. We as the church are called to be protective factors. Sometimes we can't do anything about the risk factors. Sometimes we can't do anything about the mental illness. Sometimes we can't do anything about the addiction. Sometimes we can't do anything about the poverty that they're living in right now. But we can be that protective factor. And we don't know, Kevin, whether being that protective factor is going to make a difference or not. And that's the beauty of it. Bob Greene made that comment to me. Trying to do the math. I'm not going to, because I would tell you how old I am. Many years ago, and I had the opportunity a few years ago to thank him and mention it to him, and he had no clue that comment has stuck with me more than 40 years later. That comment has helped frame who I am, helped raise me out of the darkness that I was in. It's that being the protective factor, being the salt and the light in the place of darkness, being the preservative agent, whether we know or not, whether we ever see the person rise above their circumstance or not. That's the beauty and the heartbreak of entering in.
When Bob Greene said, Mike, you're better than this, what did you hear? What did you internalize in that moment that was not there before?
Man, Kevin, you're going to make me cry.
That's my goal.
Yeah, it's not always hard with me. I heard I love you. I heard you're worth it. I heard that, you know what, your dad doesn't have time for you. Your big brothers pick on you. You don't have a whole lot of friends because you're moving around all the time. But you know what? I care about you. Come sit beside me. I care about you. That's what I heard. And that's that, you know, and by extension, of course, we know that creates that bridge to Jesus. Right? It's like when Jesus met with the woman at the well. He didn't start with all of her sin issues. He started with water, and he entered into relationship. And that told her, you know what, this is a safe place to be, and you are valued. And then he was able to speak truth.
Yeah. Yeah. You might make us all cry, Mike. Yeah. Sarah, you had your hand up before Mike. Was there something you wanted to chime in with there?
Well, he basically gave expression to what I was trying to say earlier when we glitched out there. So, you know, that is what I meant by the poverty that people experience is really different, right? There's financial poverty. And I think your question here is, you know, what can we do to end this financial poverty that people live in? But what Mike's talking about is actually the answer, which is to recognize that poverty is actually more a state of relationship and community than it is a state of financial dollars and cents. Now, that's not to say the dollars and cents aren't a thing that needs to be addressed. The issue in my mind is that economic poverty is not an individual. There isn't an individual responsibility to solve that problem. This is a systemic issue that we, as the church, as believers, we need to be standing up and we need to call it. This is unjust. This is unacceptable. I loved what Roger said. I guess we are comfortable with this. Are we? Are we just accepting that this is okay? It's not okay. So in that regard, I don't see that as the responsibility or the individuals that need to make change. It's a system that needs change, and we as the church need to take action. On the flip side, I love what Mike just said. The poverty of relationship is something every believer can be part of. And it's what every organization here is talking about, seeing people, seeing them. For the Wish to Be Home project, we've chosen the words be held, beloved, belong as the, what we are doing. And it's a housing project, certainly, but way more than that. We see people, we recognize them as beloved, and they belong. And I'm sitting here, I was just be remiss to be on this podcast with 5 men and not thank you for your role in society as fathers and men. We're coming into Father's Day, and my dad's been living with us for the last year and going through some cancer treatments and things like that. And, you know, he always said to me when I was getting out of the car, right from childhood, know who you are and whose you are. You know, like know your character and know who you belong to. And I actually really think, like, when you say what's the solution to poverty, this generational poverty, we need our men to step up and be dads. We need our families to, you know, families come in all shapes and sizes, and I embrace that. I also think we need to take on those responsibilities and love on our kids. And, you know, seeing Doug hug his grandson there, I think it was, you know, that's the job. That's the whole thing. That's what the solution to generational poverty is, stepping up and owning our roles. And I thank each of you for what you do in your communities. I just wanted to have an opportunity to say that. Thank you, Kevin, for talking about this, because it's so important for the church and for us as believers, but also just as men of the church. And I know we're in a moment in time where it's hard to be leading. It's hard for everyone to be leading, whatever your background is, whatever the story is that you're walking in with. But, you know, if we can remember that it's not the fault of those who are experiencing oppression that they experience oppression, it's the systems. And our job as leaders and those with privilege is not to own and fix everything, but to call it out and change it. Like, let's make it different. So that's what I want to say about that. And thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah. You know, I want to drag out the proverbial soapbox, and one of the ministries of the church is to be prophetic. And to be prophetic is to speak the truth in love. And just as we're winding down in the next few minutes with this podcast, I want to give each of you an opportunity to speak the truth in love and invite a little bit of prophetic edge out of you. Where are you seeing injustice? Where is your heart being broken? And let's together name those broken things. And in so doing, we call upon God to empower us all to respond to broken systems, to broken people. And so I'll start, and then no particular order. I want each of you to just take a minute or two to identify one or two things that we need to say. These things, because these need God to show up in the midst of human suffering. And I'll start with the first. In the past year and a half of shutdowns, there has been such undue suffering for people in long-term care, people in group home settings and rest homes, and you know, in the name of protection and making sure that they are healthy. There are so many people that have just been going crazy and dying alone in the name of health, in the name of protection, and that breaks my heart. My wife works in a group home, and you know that there's got to be a better way, and may God shorten the days of this suffering so that people who are in great isolation no longer have to experience that poverty. That's my prophetic pitch. How about you? Roger, go ahead and just unmute your mic there.
You know, during this time, we've seen, it's been brought to our face, the nursing homes, the minimum wage worker, the demands on so many people in our society that are crucial to our existence, that we've lived with the situation. You know, we're a funny culture in that, you know, we can go on strike, for example, in a place to get $25 wage for a janitor, and yet we can go to Tim Hortons and have no problem with the janitor there, you know, getting, you know, $14 an hour. And we've accepted all these things, all these systems that are embedded into our society that creates poverty. And we've had this catalyst, this pandemic has been a catalyst to bring into reality as to what's happening in society. It's going to be interesting when things go back. It's going to speak to a lot about who we are as a people if we just go on the same way. You know, if it was okay when we didn't need you for you to live in poverty, but we can top you up when we need you, and then go right back again. If we can close our eyes and go on with you know, we all go through the same things in life. It's ups and downs. Only thing that makes us different, and a lot of it we've got nothing to do with. You know, it's our support system that's around us. How many floors can we fall through before we get caught? And the people that make it and the people that don't make it, it's just basically, and who was around them at the time, like you said, Mike. You know, life could have ended up totally different for you, and for me, and for probably everybody. But it will speak volumes as to who we are as a people moving forward in 22, 21, you know, the end of 21, 22, 23, whether we just going on, then it just proves out what I said. You know, we're the 13th largest economy in the world, and, you know, capitalist societies can do one thing for sure, and that's solve money problems. So if we choose not to, that's tells a lot about who we are as a people.
Yeah. Thank you, Roger. Go ahead, Mike.
Church, you're better than this. I'm going to say the same words that Bob Green said to me. You're better than this. You're called to be better than this. You're called to a higher calling. Here we are still in this pandemic, and just looking at the 5 largest evangelical churches in the city of Windsor, not including all of the other smaller churches and non-evangelical churches, there's a estimated combined family income of about $238 million a year. If you tithe 10% on that, which I'm pretty sure a lot of us don't, still, that's $23.8 million. I'm pretty sure that those top 5 churches could operate on a budget of about $3 million without really impacting their operations at all. That leaves $20 million a year that we are called to give, but either we are and it's being spent on other things, or we're not giving. And then there's, of course, our time. Here we are in a pandemic, and there are people who are dying of loneliness. Are you picking up your phone and calling people? Are you checking in on your neighbors? That's being the body of Christ. Church, we are better than this. And I believe coming out of COVID, God is calling us to be better than this. I believe he's calling us like never before to truly enter into the lives of people in our community, to be his hands and feet, to let them see his heart. If we recognize that we are better than this. So that's my prophetic word, that church be his hands, be his feet, be better than this.
Ouch and amen.
I guess I'll go. Give Sarah the last word, or the other Kevin. Jean Vanier, who's a bit out of fashion right now, but he wrote regarding the disabled people that he worked with, but I think it applies to many of the marginalized folks that we've all been talking about, that people have basically 4 reactions to them. One is first is fear, the unknown. They look different. They are different. Then pity, then tolerance, and then compassion, and maybe there's a 5th one. I guess he had maybe 5. And that was a place of grace, that when you touch them, you touch the face of God. And, you know, we've all in this conversation been talking about the church, responsive, understanding, moving in that direction. But, you know, there are a lot of folks in our communities that would not be on that side. They still labor in the, maybe in those stereotypes, that conservatism thing, bootstrap thing. And somehow in love and prophetic voice, we have to speak to those folks too. Because unless the church, I think, speaks in a unified voice on this, I mean, it's a great opportunity, I think, now, right? This is the thing in the postmodern world. I think it gives us a right to be heard. And how a society treats its most vulnerable is its measure. And right now, of course, there's a lot in how Canada is treating its Indigenous folks. That's our measure, and it's not good in many respects, but it's much broader than that too. And so, you know, I pray that coming out of this, that we really will understand where the face of God really is and be there. And thanks for the opportunity, Kevin.
Thank you, Doug. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was going to let Kevin get the last word. So from my perspective, what I'm seeing in the street and from the prophets that are around me, it's really them that I've been seeing this through, is that there's 2 things going on around us. And fortunately, part of it is life-giving. There's lots of life-giving things that are happening. Art, creativity, the hope that we can reconstruct our society at this time, like that, you know, what will we do? How will we reconstruct after COVID-19? You know, there's an opportunity for true life giving. And of course, we know the giver of life is Jesus. And I think it's just absolutely important that the church remember that Jesus came to give us life and to give us life more abundantly. And abundantly doesn't mean selfishly. It's a life where we live in the wholeness to be sharing that constantly. We have that I don't need to worry about my tomorrow. I can give boldly because, and I don't just mean that financially, I mean this in every way. And when we think about restitution to our Indigenous folks, when we think about the ways we need to show up around poverty, when we think about the property taxes that you're going to need to pay next year, if we want to do something different, we need to really be honest, transparent. I'm going to live life. I'm going to live it abundantly. And I hope for people that they remember that in their own poverty of relationship too. So I've heard that loneliness thing. This is also true in what's going on with the opioid crisis. Here in London, we've had a number of people die. People that I knew and that I cared about here at the Ark have died in the last couple of months. And it's been just really sad to see. And the life-giving part of that is the hope that these folks were loved. They were part of an abundant life. There was parts of, even though that was the end, that they were part of an abundant life. The flip side of that is the death dealing. And I want to just declare and speak this to the church, that the church needs to be so mindful to not be part of the death dealing that happens. This is the ways that we closet people. We don't want to hear from them. We don't want to, I can't bring my whole self to church. How will we gather again? How will we come out of our loneliness, our stay safe at home? What will it look like? Are we going to welcome whole people with their dirty, difficult challenges, the brokenness, the broken pieces of us? How we do that for one another will speak volumes to how we can show up to our communities. And so I just really want to encourage the church. Let's not be death dealing, gossiping, damning people with our words, with our actions. We need to be welcoming. And so these are the two sides I see on the street all the time. There's death dealing actions and there's life giving ways of being. And that is a poverty that exists inside the walls of the church and outside the walls of the church. And so we as the church need to really, I think, begin to talk in that language and live in the wholeness and the fulfillment and the abundance that God has called us to.
Mr. Coghill.
Wow. I can't pretend to think that this message is for the church, but I'll say it's for me.
Me too.
Been stuck on the word dependency, like it's some bad thing. We're called to be dependent. We're the body of Christ. I don't know. I feel like when this is done, we need to be interdependent. And that doesn't mean we're giving handouts, even though we sometimes are. It means that we are also being saved from being saved. We're being transformed. We're being converted. And for me, that's the magic or the blessing of being part of people who are suffering. I'm continually converted again and again every day. I meet Jesus face to face, and I believe that others meet him in me. So I would just welcome other people into that.
Well, I just want to thank you all for just filling this podcast with stuff that is going to keep me up at night. And this is so good. And what I hear in all of us is this calling to the church to find ways to be present. Go into all the world. Well, going into all the world means being present in all the world. Go in all the world and make disciples. What better do we have to follow than our Jesus? Who loves better than Jesus? And so we'll just keep following him. We'll keep it simple. We'll follow Jesus wherever he is, and we'll be present with him and see what he wants to do. And when we suffer, we'll suffer well because Jesus is with us. Thank you, friends. And I can't wait to get this edited and out the door so other people can hear everything you had to say. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. What a great bunch of men and women involved in community transformation. And that brings us to the end of our QUEST acronym with the letter T. Part 2, we had the last of the interview with Meet the Transformers. On our next episode, we're going to be interviewing Kelly Franklin. In fact, it's going to be a 2-part episode because she had so much to say that we couldn't fit it all into one episode. So please come back and hear Kelly as she shares her story from a life on the streets to now rescuing people from human trafficking. An amazing lady, and her ministry is called Courage for Freedom. So come back, will ya? I'm Kevin Rogers, and this is Sidewalk Skyline Podcast.